Welcome to episode 51 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 or pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories their way in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50 and your host for today's show. Today I am interviewing a man who loves to tell stories. He's a former journalist turned public relations professional who also developed a love for photography along the way. Now in his 60s, he serves as an interpreter during medical missions around the world. After getting a degree in Spanish and European studies, Jeff Crider considered a career with the U.S. State Department, but opted to go into journalism instead. Over the years, he became an exceptional storyteller with a knack for using words and photography to tell his stories. With a growing family to support, he moved from journalism to public relations until the dot-com bust forced him into self-employment. But that opened even more doors for him as well. After a painful divorce, Jeff's life went in a different direction when he met a couple who organized medical missions around the world to provide much-needed services to desperately poor people. To explain how doors seemed to open at just the right time to move his life forward to an even grander purpose, please welcome Jeff Crider to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Jeff. I really appreciate your time. Now, I've known you for a number of years in the RV industry. You did public relations work. I was a journalist. Tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you are right now.
I'm actually at my home in Palm Desert, California, right now, next to my swimming pool, so I can hear water trickling. I hear birds chirping, and it's a beautiful day, even in December.
How long have you lived there?
I've lived here about 16 years so far.
Where were you?
But yeah, I've lived in Palm Desert before, but this latest run, I've been out here for about 60 years. I grew up in LA and then moved around after that with jobs.
Okay.
But I've spent about half of my life in the desert.
And has your career involved public relations and journalism the entire time?
Yes.
Before you turned...
I started off after grad school. I have a double bachelor's in Spanish and European studies. I lived and studied in Spain, Madrid, during my junior year. And that's where I got really fluent in Spanish. And then from there, I went on into a master's program and I got a double master's degree in Spanish, what was basically Spanish and Latin American studies. And at that time, I was thinking of going into the State Department because I wanted to use my Spanish for something positive. And I was thinking at that time that I would go into the State Department. As I got through my graduate program, I realized that I didn't really agree with a lot of U.S. foreign policy. And I saw that there were a lot of contradictions between what we said our values were and what we were actually doing around the world. And not wanting to be a hypocrite, I thought, you know what? This is not a good choice for me. The interesting thing is that my mom had actually wanted me to major in journalism from the beginning. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer for the Boston Herald. He later became editor of the Boston Herald. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I basically inherited his writing ability or some of his writing ability. I think he was a better writer than I am. I've had opportunity to read a number of his articles and whatnot. Definitely, he was a better editorial writer, but I think I write with more heart. I think I do better at features than he did. But I have some of his gift, and I didn't realize that I had it when I was in my 20s. So I joke with people now that it only took me 7 years to realize my mom was right, that I should have done this at the beginning, but you have to follow your own path. And so I did that, and then I ended up actually I started off writing letters to the editor, blasting U.S. foreign policy in Central America. This was back in the 80s. And my letters were getting published, not only by small town newspapers, but by the LA Times.
Wow.
And that kind of made me reconsider, maybe my mom was right. Maybe I can write. And then I had taken a backpacking trip with my best friend up to the base of Mount Everest. We did this in 1985. And there's probably a couple of years after that I wrote an article for the Sunday magazine of the Monterey Herald in Monterey, California, because that's where I was going to school. And that was my first article, full-length feature story published in a newspaper. And the feedback that I got from that was enormous. I was invited by the local Toastmasters group to give a talk, which I did. I had no idea. But 25, who knows what Toastmaster is? Toastmasters. I had no idea. I did that. The head of the International Studies Department said, Jeff, I think you've got real talent here with your writing. And so it was funny because I would listen to Dr. Garrett, who was in charge of international studies at the Monterey Institute, but I wouldn't listen to my own mother. But when Dr. Garrett said, Jeff, I think you could be a writer, then it was like, okay, I can do this. So then I started looking for jobs, and I ended up getting hired by the Imperial Valley Press, which is in the Imperial Valley, and I was based in Calexico, right on the Mexican border. And I realized that they hired me not because I could write, but because I spoke Spanish, because that's what they needed. And the neat thing is that they let me do whatever I wanted to do in Mexico. And I had an interest in becoming a foreign correspondent. And so this was an opportunity for me to be a foreign correspondent and cheat, because I could literally go into Mexico during the day, do my interviews and stories, and then come back across the US border to go sleep. And so I did that for almost 4 years. I absolutely loved it. I had a network of reporter friends at Mexican newspapers that would guide me. They would call me when there was something big going on. And we used to receive La Voz de la Frontera and Novedades, which were the two big Mexicali newspapers. We used to get those at my office. And I would read those every day, but they would call me and give me tips on other things that were going on. And so they were really mentoring me. And then I had also some mentors in Mexican academia. There was a technical institute down there, and there was a doctor there who was in charge of business development, but he used to mentor me on things. And then I had contact in the Mexicali Industrial Development Commission, and he used to help me on things. And because I was only 25 when I started as a reporter, and I would write about all of these topics, but I didn't have as much background on Mexico as I did on other countries. And yet here I was writing for a newspaper. So I wanted to be right about what I was writing about. And so what I would do is, with some of the bigger stories, if I did political analysis or other things like that, I would actually send the stories to some of my sources to check over, just to say, am I on the right path here? Because I didn't want to sound like an idiot or be naive about things. And they never, ever told me to change anything. But it gave me confidence in myself that I was interpreting things. And I got to interview the governor of the Rufo Appel, Ernesto Rufo Appel. He was the first opposition party governor of Baja California. I used to go to the airport when President Salinas would arrive. It was really cool. I got to do a lot of really neat things. And from there, of course, after a while, you want to grow as a reporter. And to grow in journalism, you need to move on to bigger publications. And so I went from there on to the Desert Sun in Palm Springs, the Gannett newspaper, was there for about 3 years. And then from there, I went on to the Press Enterprise, which was based in, or is based in Riverside. And I was based in their Temecula bureau. And when I was at the Press Enterprise, they had me cover the RV industry as part of my business beat. Because back in those days, and this is back in the 1990s, Fleetwood was there, National RV, Thor, California. There were a number of companies that were headquartered in Riverside and San Bernardino counties in what's called the Inland Empire. And at that time, they said that the largest concentration of RV manufacturing in the United States outside of Elkhart, Indiana, was in the Riverside and San Bernardino county area. And that's where I was. And my editor actually told me when he hired me at the Press Enterprise, he said, you're going to have some freelance opportunities with the RV industry with this job. And he was right. And the timing was good because that's when my daughter was born, my first child. And that's how I can tell how long I've been in the RV industry, and is because I started working for them right before she was born, and she's 28 now, soon to be 29. So that's how long I can tell I've been in this business. I figured I would only do it for a little while. And it certainly helped because my wife was a stay-at-home mom, and we were trying to do things the old-fashioned way, with her being at home taking care of the kids and me working and whatnot. But the thing was, I didn't make very much money as a newspaper reporter. And so the freelancing really helped on the side. And so I continued to do that. And then later on, I moved on into public relations work, and I worked for US Filter initially. They're no longer in existence right now, but they were the world's largest manufacturer of water treatment systems for cities and industry. We had operations in 95 countries and 15,000 employees, about 3 billion in sales. And this was back in the late 90s. And I was in charge of their press releases globally. So it was a fantastic job. I was literally overseeing communications worldwide. And I worked with an outside PR firm as well. And then the person in charge of our account, the company's name was Ketchum Public Relations. And the person in charge of our account actually schooled me in message development and PR tactics because I knew nothing really about PR. I was a writer, but I had no experience actually working in PR. And so he was the one who trained me. And then what ended up happening is later on, US Filter got acquired by Vivendi of Paris, France. And then after that, I lost some of my stripes because some of my responsibilities were transferred to other people in Paris, France. And I realized that I needed to start looking for another job. The person who was at Ketchum ended up leaving and going to another company called Storsa. And they were headquartered in San Diego. They had offices all over California. They were California's largest independent PR firm. And so the guy who taught me how to do messaging and PR strategy ended up later recruiting me to join him at Storsa, which I did. And then I was director of media relations and I was headquartered in Riverside. What happened later, I was with them for almost 4 years. And then they had a crisis in the company and the company broke apart. We had taken on too much business during the dot-com period. With all the startups, and the company got into financial trouble. I was actually let go, the only time in my adult life when I was let go from a job. And so this was crisis number one that I went through. And I think I was about 42, maybe even younger when that happened. I think I was a little bit younger when that happened. Anyway, maybe I was 42. I forget. I'd have to go back and do the math. But in my early 40s is when that happened. What happened was I got laid off on a Monday from my PR job, and I had 5 clients I was working for. 3 of the 5 clients rehired me independently the same week. One of them gave me a $60,000 retainer.
Wow.
I was literally forced into my own business. So all of this, and it was 2002, so I was 39. I hadn't had my birthday yet. I was 39 when this happened. So what I thought was a crisis, what was a crisis initially, turned out to be a huge opportunity for me. Because with that, I went from having to put on a suit and having a $50 dry cleaning bill every week or whatever, and having to commute an hour and a half each way, each day. I went from that kind of lifestyle to working in the extra bedroom upstairs in our house and being available for my kids. And I remember being able to, that first year, being able to take my kids swimming every day in the afternoon in the summer. Oh, it was so wonderful. I felt like I was cheating, but I would get up early in the morning. I would do my interviews on the East Coast at 5 a.m, and I would keep up with all of my work. I was just able to use that commuting time instead and spend it with my kids. And I remember that first year telling my wife, I was so sad when they had to go to school because it's like, who's going to swim with me?
This was before homeschooling was a fad.
Yes, it is. And this was, so basically it was as if we were living a pandemic lifestyle 20 years before the pandemic or 18 years before the pandemic. This was 2002. So it was 18 years before the pandemic. But I've basically been a home-based consultant for 21 years at this point. And it's been fantastic. We continued with this, with me working, and I continued to freelance on the side for RV Business Magazine and Woodall's Campground Magazine. What happened with that? And I did that because I really liked RVing and camping. I grew up RVing and camping with my parents, and all of my best memories growing up were of those trips. what ended up happening is one of my assignments for RV Business was to do a big package of articles on park models. And I did that, and the response from the industry was very positive. And I got a call from Bill Garpo, who at that time was the head of RPTIA, the Recreational Park Trailer Industry Association. He asked me if I wanted to do PR for them. And I said, sure. And so I started doing work for them. And then that PR assignment led to assignments with the National Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds and with several other state associations across the country. So very quickly, my regular writing work for the RV and campground industries morphed into doing PR work for them as well. And everybody knew who I was because I had been writing for RV Business already for several years by that time, and Woodall's Campground Management. So most people in the industry who followed the media knew who I was. At least they recognized my name. At the same time, I was doing my PR consulting with cities and water agencies in California. And that kind of continued. Had another crisis heading into 2005, and I ended up going through a divorce. And that was the roughest of all the crises I've ever been through. What I didn't realize at the time was that was setting the stage for more opportunities for me that I never could have imagined. What ended up happening after that is, first, I should backtrack a little bit and mention that since I had been working from home, I was in a perfect situation to take care of kids. So I was able to continue working and being a stay-at-home dad, which was a situation most people don't have. Certainly most men don't have.
That's right.
And so I realized how blessed I was. Yeah, I was grateful, so grateful for my former boss for letting me go and then having my clients force me into, they wanted me to be their consultant. And so I was literally forced into business for myself. And then I was set up perfectly to be a stay-at-home dad when I went through the divorce. And then the other thing that happened was we were living in San Diego at that time, and we moved back to the Coachella Valley to Palm Desert. We did that for economic reasons because it's more affordable here than in San Diego. What happened when we came back here is a couple of friends of mine who were in the Rotary Club, Laura and Tassine are their names. And I joke with them that they coerced me into joining Rotary. I had no idea what Rotary was. And I joined the Rotary Club, and it was through the Rotary Club that I met Inez and Tracy Allen. And Inez and Tracy Allen had co-founded IMA Helps, which is a medical nonprofit. They organize medical humanitarian missions all over Central and South America. So I initially started writing press releases for them to help them recruit volunteers and raise money for their medical missions. And I started doing this around 2000 and then 2008. And then a friend of mine at the time said, Jeff, you need to go with them to Ecuador. You shouldn't just be writing their press releases. You need to be there. And so I asked Inez, I said, Inez, could you use me down in Ecuador? And she said, yes, please come. We could use you as an interpreter. And I thought she was just being kind because it had been years since I used my Spanish for anything. And anyway, I get down to Ecuador, and lo and behold, they were short interpreters and they really did need me. And it was the most electrifying experience I had ever had with my Spanish because I was interpreting for surgeons. There were emergency situations that I was interpreting for the doctors and the nurses through real emergency. And I remember doing, I think on my first day, I interpreted for an orthopedic surgeon giving instructions to the ICU staff, the nurses who were going to take care of patients overnight, giving the specifics of each patient and what needed to be done and that kind of thing. So I interpreted through all of that. And I have no medical background. I had to learn medical terminology. And I remember telling the surgeon, please be very basic because I'm still learning. And it took me probably about 4 years to learn all the medical Spanish I needed to know. And I don't know all medical Spanish, but I know enough to do most of what I need to do. But I used to sit with a dictionary on my lap and notes as I was interpreting for the doctors. This got to be a real passion for me. And I just remember just feeling so grateful that I was able to do this. And I remember also on that mission there on one of the nights, we were in Latacunga, Ecuador. So we were up at about 9,000 feet in the Andes Mountains. This was in the summer, our summer, probably late June, early July, sometime around there. But it was freezing cold in the Andes Mountains where we were, freezing. And I remember one night I was interpreting for our prosthetist, and he was measuring children for artificial arms and legs and things like that. And I remember being so cold that I grabbed a sheet off of one of the empty hospital beds to use as a blanket because I was shivering. My teeth were chattering like a little child. I hadn't been so cold that I can't remember how long. I don't know how late it was. It must have been 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And there was a mom who came with her little boy, and the little boy was 6 years old. And he was missing part of one of his arms. And then he needed some other prosthetics. And anyway, there was some reason why we asked the mom to take his pants off so they could take some measurements of his legs and whatnot. And we noticed that he didn't have any underwear and he didn't have any shoes on. It was freezing. I don't know what the temperature was. It was probably, I'm guessing it was probably in the low 40s. And we're inside a cinder block hospital, very primitive, no heat. It's freezing in there. And I remember asking the mom, do you have any shoes for your son? And she said no. And then I asked her, has he ever had shoes? And she said no. So here was a mom with her 6-year-old boy who had never had shoes. And she was there seeking help from us in this freezing hospital room. And her boy is insufficiently dressed. So we did have some clothing. We had children's clothing we had brought, so we were able to get him outfitted with some clothing. I don't know. I can't remember if they were able to get him some shoes. I can't remember the details. But I remember thinking, because this was just about a couple of years after I had gone through, I think about 3 years after I went through my divorce, 2.5 years. And I remember thinking, my kids had been through a lot with the divorce, but they haven't been through anything like this. And I remember just thinking how grateful and how lucky I should be that really I had nothing to be angry about with the trauma that I went through with the divorce. So really that medical mission healed me of all the trauma that I went through and the anger. I dropped it immediately. And so what I did is I turned all of that negative energy into positive energy. And so really the missions have been tremendously healing for me as a person. They have also enabled me to use my Spanish for something positive, which is what I wanted to do when I was in grad school. I always wanted to do something positive. That's why I went into journalism initially. And when the State Department didn't seem like that was going to work, I ended up in journalism, and I wanted to use my writing to do something positive wherever I was. And then I wanted to use my Spanish in Latin America to do positive things. So I realized that the medical mission work enabled me to do all of that. It enabled me to speak. They eventually started using me as a media spokesman. They would use my writing to promote the missions, to solicit donations, seek volunteers. And then later on, they put me on the board of directors. And then I got involved with actually setting up the missions and with other volunteers. What ended up happening was, I remember telling Inez after my first mission, so I was about 45. And I remember telling her, this is really cool, this kind of work. I think when I'm retired, I could see myself doing this maybe 3 or 4 times a year. That was 2008. By 2010, I did 2 missions. I was gone for a month out of the country. And I went to China that year with another one of our volunteers with another group. They needed me to do journalistic work. And then I went to Nicaragua that year. The guy who was my Mandarin interpreter in China, I recruited him to join us. I said, Dr. Chan, you've been so kind to interpret for me in China. If you come with me to Nicaragua, I'll return the favor and interpret for you there. And he did. And he's been volunteering with us for 13 years now. And this has just been the most incredible journey going through all of this. So all of these years, I've continued to do my writing work, my freelance writing, my PR work. I continue to spend about half of my time with the RV and campground industries, and then the other half primarily with water agencies. The other thing that's happened is my writing work has evolved into writing history books of all things. I had never planned to do history books, but one project has led to another. And I find that I really enjoy it. I used to love doing investigative work when I was a young reporter. I loved exposing fraud and corruption and getting the bad guys, exposing them. And there were some investigative reports that I did when I was in my younger years that resulted in FBI investigations, other federal investigations, indictments. I thought that was pretty cool. Now I use my investigative work to write books and to document history. And I've actually written several books. I have one here. This is a book. This was actually in Spanish. I did this for the city of Coachella in California. And it's a history book focusing on their immigrant communities. And I did it in English and in Spanish. And I've done other books for water agencies. And during the pandemic, I did this one, A Vision of Hope, which documents the first 20 years of IMA Helps, the medical nonprofit that I've been volunteering with. And since I've been interpreting for the doctors and I've been writing their press releases and whatnot, I realized that I've basically been on the front lines of every medical mission since 2008. So I was in a great position to write a book because I was there. And then I had quotes from the patients. I had quotes from the doctors that I had been gathering all of these years for press releases and other materials. And I kept myself busy during the pandemic doing that. And you were asking about what happens at 50 and whatnot. I started the medical mission work at 45. I wrote my first book at age 51. I'm 61 now. I've written 9 books so far for water agencies and cities. I've done a book for George O'Leary from the campground industry, who passed away earlier this year. I did a book for a healthcare district, Desert Healthcare District in Palm Springs. So I've written, and I just finished a book recently for the Central Arizona Project in Arizona. That'll probably be out next year. And I'm just basically doing things I love to do. And one of our surgeons says, if you love what you do, it's not work. And that's absolutely true. I just wish I had a little bit more energy so that I could do even more of it. But it's just been great. And I've been able to do so many things. At 53, I climbed Kilimanjaro with my son, Max, as a fundraising effort for LifeWater International. I ran the LA Marathon at age 54. At age 58, I bicycled across southern Cambodia for LifeWater International. That was 200 miles. We did that in 8 days. It was right before the pandemic started. Literally, we were lucky to get out of there and get back home. But I just feel so blessed. And really the thing that I've learned as I look back is that every crisis that I went through, everything that seemed like it was the end of the world was actually a new beginning. And anything that seemed like a setback really was setting me up for something better. I just didn't realize it at the time. And so I've learned over the years, certainly in recent years, to be patient. When people don't call me back, when people don't email me back, when I'm proposing certain things or whatever, I figure don't fight it. There's probably a reason for it and something better will come along. That's
a great
what I've been
story.
doing.
A lot of people, they'll encounter a negative thing such as a divorce or a medical setback or whatever, and they think their life comes to an end at that point. But you're saying that, no, that is the beginning of something brand new. I like that
Yes.
perspective, and it worked out well
Yes.
for you.
I certainly felt going through the divorce, that was the end. I considered myself a failure. I thought I failed my kids. I failed myself. I failed my spouse and whatnot. And what I realized is that really there was nothing that I could have done to save that particular situation.
How do you think
And
people can overcome this kind of trauma and move past it? Well, you have some tips for them?
yeah, I think one thing is to do the things that you love to do. What have you historically loved to do? I remember one time my mom came down to visit me when I was going through the divorce, and I was all consumed by the trauma of all of that. And she came and she brought 2 or 3 photos that I had taken, nature photos, to hang on my walls. And that was just so therapeutic because I love nature photography. And it made me think, oh yeah, nature. That's right. I love nature because you can be so consumed by the fire that you're going through that you forget about the things that you love.
Hmm.
And I remember also when I remember there was a therapist who told me, take a hike, literally go take a hike. And I love to hike, but I didn't during that period. And I remember sometime after the divorce, I went with another friend and took a hike in the mountains. And I remember just feeling so good. And that is something that's very healthy. And this is something else. When I went through all of that storm, I stayed away from alcohol. That doesn't mean I didn't drink alcohol. I drank alcohol, but I didn't abuse it. I didn't ask for any medications of any kind because I wanted to be alert and functioning. And so, if anything, I was more of a teetotaler during that period than would otherwise be the case. But I think you focus on your core self. What's the essence of you? What are the things you most like to do? And the things I most like to do are hike and take pictures and write. And so I did more hiking and photography.
I read somewhere that it's that kind of grounding experience where you're out in nature and on the ground and walking, just shedding all the stress and responsibility of work that really changes your perspective mentally.
It does it, and it's so natural to do that. And just the act of being outside and hearing the birds. I love birds. Just hearing, I have no idea what they are. One of these days I'm going to join Audubon and start going on the walk because I can't tell you. I know what a blue jay is and I know what a crow is and I know what a bald eagle is, but anything else,
Hmm.
I'm going to be pressed to tell you what it is. But it's just so therapeutic hearing the sounds of nature, hearing the crickets, hearing the wind in the leaves, those kinds of things. And I think that we have so many things at our fingertips,
Hmm.
at our disposal. It doesn't cost you anything to go take a hike. You can go walk on the beach. I live in the desert. There are beautiful places where I go hiking in the desert. And it's just so serene and so peaceful. The other thing is that when you spend that time even just walking, your mind keeps working, of course, and you'll get ideas
Yes.
that will inspire you and help you figure the way out of the storm or figure out your next steps. And I certainly think that one of the things, and I can't remember who it was who told me this, but when I went through the divorce, somebody told me every crisis has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when you're going through it, you think it's going to go on forever,
Hmm.
that the ugliness that you experience on the worst days is going to be the defining experience of the rest of your life. And that's not true because there are obviously low points, but then you start to get to the point where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And the thing that is so miraculous about my life now is I'm grateful for all of those setbacks. I'm grateful for things because I know that if I had stayed married to the person I was married to, I wouldn't have had all of the incredible experiences I've had these past 16 years. The other thing is I've been able to take my kids with me on these medical missions.
How many kids do you
And
have?
I have two kids.
Okay.
So I have a daughter who's 28 and I have a son who's 24. My daughter went with me to Nicaragua on a medical mission. And then I later took her to Costa Rica and we spent a week of father-daughter time there. Most incredible week I've
Oh,
ever had with her. Just fantastic time. My son, since he's younger, was able to go with me more. And he's been with me on 5 medical missions, twice to El Salvador, 3 times to Paraguay. I took him to Brazil for Rotary's International Convention in 2015. And then the other thing is I've started learning Portuguese with a private tutor. So I'm on my 3rd language
wow.
and I use it. And it's just, I think life has so many possibilities. And I think when you hit a wall or you hit a crisis, you have to realize that's a temporary setback. Of course, when you're going through it, you think it's the end of the world. It's not. It's unless you allow it to be. But if you're
That
willing to keep working at it, the other thing is gravitate to those family members who help you, those friends who help you, because I did. I leaned on a couple of family members. I was calling them almost every day because I would get such pains in my stomach when I was going through the divorce. I could hardly eat. I think I lost about 30 pounds. Some people said I look really good. I shed all that extra weight. but it wasn't healthy,
Well, I
you
like the
know?
whole idea of turning the negative energy into a positive because I think a lot of people over 50, when they get into that funk, when the bad stuff happens and they just withdraw into themselves, and then life becomes nothing more than watching television and doom scrolling through news stories and social media. And to turn that into a positive experience, and all it would necessarily take would be a walk to change the frame of reference. But then
Yes.
what can they do to really move into that positive? How do they turn the negative into positive?
For me, of course, it was volunteer work, but I never realized that I would find that in medical mission work. I didn't know that was a possibility for me at all. I had no idea. When I was in my 20s, I did think about Amnesty International and groups like that because I was drawn to what they were doing. I was interested in what they were doing, but I also didn't want to go someplace and be arrested because I thought,
Exactly.
what good is it if I go through grad school, get all this education, and then go to some country to protest something and then get locked up? What good is that? What
Right.
am I going to really achieve with that? And the other thing, when I was in grad school, I had several friends who were in the Peace Corps or had been in the Peace Corps. And I actually sent away for an application for the Peace Corps. But when I went to the base of Everest, I ended up getting so sick on that hike. It literally scared the SHIT out of me, out of the idea of going into the Peace Corps. I recovered. I was really sick for a couple of days. I probably got E. coli or something like that from bad sanitary conditions.
Mhm.
But it made me realize that this is what happens in the third world. And I thought, what good am I if I go to Africa or some other place if I'm going to die over there if I get sick like this again?
Hmm.
And so it made me table the idea of the Peace Corps. Now, I have since spoken to actual Peace Corps directors since then. And I know at some point in my more mature years, I may volunteer for a 6-month assignment or something like that. But that's going to be down the road, maybe in my 70s or something like that. I would do that. I'm not as afraid of those things now. I think that's the other thing. As you get older, you're less afraid of certain things because you've already been beaten up. I think that's the other thing that happens. When you go through whatever crisis life throws at you, you realize that none of us gets out of here unscathed. There are some people that can go through a number of years and not have anything bad happen. There's some people that have everything bad happening early on, but you have to respond. And that's the ultimate thing. We're all going to get hit with a challenge of one sort or another, maybe multiple challenges. We all have to figure out how we're going to dust ourselves off and move on, keep going. And I think the trick is to do what you love and what you feel good about. And that's the thing I've discovered through the medical missions is I absolutely love what I do when I'm doing that because I feel like I'm giving the best I can give of myself to the world, to the least fortunate people in the world. And I'm also stimulating my mind because it is challenging doing what I do when I'm interpreting, to be on the ball, listening, paying attention to what's being said. There's a lot of responsibility with it when you're doing media interviews and things like that.
If people over 50 wanted to get involved in this medical mission, is it something that they would have to do? Do they need specific skills? Would they need to
Depends
be
on what
bilingual?
it depends on what their skills are. Our website is IMA Helps. It's IM like Mary, helps, IMA Helps.org. People can sign up through there. And we have nurses. We have all kinds of people. Sometimes we'll take extra interpreters with us. Just depends on what their skill set is. We could always use people to help us write grants. There's a lot of help that nonprofits need. We have no paid staff. And that's something unusual about us. We've been around for 23 years with no paid staff. Everybody's a volunteer. But there are skills that we obviously need. We could use a grant writer, somebody who has experience in the nonprofit world, somebody who's good at fundraising, somebody who knows how to write those letters, how to make those phone calls. It's not always traveling to Timbuktu to volunteer with us. There's work that could be done right here. The other thing is that I think just when you're involved in something, helping others, it's a good deed to do that. And you feel good doing that. When I volunteer in medical missions, it's like doing 1,000 good deeds. We'll see thousands of patients. And it's just very uplifting doing that. It takes your mind off of the negativity in the world right now, especially in our news media and social media. It just gets you away from all of that. Because if you're busy focusing on these positive things, then you don't have time to focus on so much on the negative things. And the other thing I think is you're navigating midlife crisis or whatever else you're encountering. You have to think about what kind of example you're setting for your kids, for other family members. And I think you can express your love for your children by taking care of yourself.
It's a very good point. A lot of people are watching you, even though they might not be interacting with you. And so
Yes.
by getting out of your shell and going out and doing the things that you've dreamed of doing or that you feel called to do, other people are going to be inspired as a result of that. And it's
Yes.
just going to have that ripple effect that will
There,
extend for generations. Technically, you can change lives.
yes. There have been people who've contacted me that have told me that they have been inspired by what I have been doing and they've made changes in their own lives as a result of seeing what I've been doing. And they have their own journeys that they're working on. We all need inspiration. It's hard to be self-propelling constantly. It's nice to hear compliments. It's nice to hear people commending you for what you're doing. It inspires you. And I just think we're a all of us are a work in progress and we can always get better. And that's the way I see things. I don't really see myself ever really retiring. I see myself just continuing to work, to write. I think I liken writing to cooking. You know how your grandparents probably had grandparents who were really good cooks or
Yes.
could certain things really well. And I realized that the reason they were good cooks is because they were doing it their whole life.
Hmm.
And you've had a lot of time for trial and error. And I hear even from my own kids that I'm a better cook now, way better than I was years ago. And I hear it from family members too. I bake bread and do things like that. And it's just you get better at things as you get practice. And I think it's just something neat to share.
What's
You
still on
know,
your bucket list?
I am going to Patagonia next year. I'm going hiking there and wanting to do that. I'm doing that with my friend Paul and a couple of medical mission volunteers. And we've hiked in the Himalayas together. We hiked up Kilimanjaro. We hiked all over the Sierras. So for us to get to Patagonia, that'll be cool. After that, I'm going to want to go to Alaska. Still haven't been to Alaska yet. Love to get up to the Arctic Circle. I discovered a really remote lodge in Alaska that you can only fly to. There's no roads going there. Stumbled onto that while doing research for an article I wrote last year. So that's on my list. I'd love to travel to exotic places. I'd love to go back to Italy. I'd love to do more travel where I enjoy the food and the wine and the scenery, not rushing through to see every museum, but just enjoying the differences, the beauty of different places. And the other thing as I look to the future is I've got a grandson now. My grandson is 3, and I've already warned my son Max, we're going to have to climb Kilimanjaro again when my grandson was old enough to do that. And I've already calculated I'm going to be probably 73, 74. But I have confidence doing that because the oldest person on the hike when I did Kilimanjaro, her name was Shirley, and she was 74, and she beat all of us to the top.
That's funny.
She was a little firecracker. So,
Are you still working?
oh yeah, absolutely. I work 50, 60 hours a week. So I'm very busy with all of my consulting work and with my writing work. I'm extremely busy. So I'm grateful for that. And I think that one thing about writing, I think writing is a lot like cooking because the more experience you have with it, the older you get, the better you get at it. So I think I can write better now than I could when I was 25. I can't run as fast as I could when I was 25, but I can write better. And the other things is I look at things with more maturity than I could assess things back then. And it is hard to even know what that means when you're 25 or 30, because you have to suffer through a few knocks in life and you have to live through more BS,
Mm-hmm.
be able to recognize the BS.
That's right.
And you get a certain sense of humility as well.
People say all the time that this new artificial intelligence is going to put writers out of business. And I disagree because the computers don't know the stories and they can't put the emotion behind the stories.
And they can't do interviews.
Right.
at least not yet. Yeah, the history books that I've written, they include quotes from research I've done, interviews that I've done. That can't be produced by AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw an article today somewhere talking about how AI poses a threat to teachers because some institutions may want to use AI to do teaching and lay off teachers. And I thought, that sounds terrific because even when I've run a few questions through AI for water agency history, the information I get back is plausible, but not necessarily fully correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it misses nuances and there's clear errors and things like that. But all ChatGPT is really cut and paste or copy and paste. It's not doing much original thinking and the creativity is lost. And certainly we'll see what happens with it. It's frustrating to me that they put so much emphasis on these kinds of things that can eliminate jobs, because I think there's dignity in being employed no matter what you do. And it frustrates me when I see more and more technology being dedicated to putting people out of work only for profits. It just infuriates me.
How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to connect?
Email me, Crider, Crider, publicrelations@gmail.com.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate you sharing your stories with us. You've had quite a life, and I'm glad that you figured out how to turn those negative situations into positive, and that you see that wasn't the end of your life, but actually a platform for starting another one. And I think that other people will find that very encouraging.
I didn't figure all of this out on my own. As I mentioned earlier, it was a friend of mine who told me that I needed to volunteer with IMA Helps in Ecuador. I hadn't thought about that. I just thought my role would be writing press releases for them. And she said, "You idiot, you need to be down there. You have a heart for this."
Somebody else had just suggested that as well. They said that if you don't know what your purpose is, then start volunteering. At least you're going to be serving other people. And through the process of serving, it's just going to give you that kick inside to really you feel good and you want to do more. And eventually you'll stumble into an area that is just made for you.
Yes. And I think that the people that we meet along the way help guide us. We eventually end up doing what we should be doing. Eventually. It may take us a while, but we eventually get there.
Thank you again for your time, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And I wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you very much.
I have known Jeff Crider for almost 25 years. As a journalist, he covered the California RV industry, while I covered the industry from a national perspective as the editor of several business publications. As a freelance writer, the press releases Jeff wrote were often among the best in the industry. Jeff just loves to write, and he's very good at telling stories in ways that grab people's attention and draw them into the story. The photographs he takes are stunning as well. When he combines photos and words, he creates a compelling and memorable narrative. He's also one of the most adventurous people I know who loves to connect with the outdoors. In fact, it was a connection to nature that helped him recover from the trauma of a personally devastating divorce. He discovered being in nature was a way to reduce stress and promote creative thinking. Jeff's greatest legacy is his commitment to IMA Helps. It's an organization of medical professionals who volunteer their time to helping people around the world. Jeff said participating in just one medical mission is like doing 1,000 good deeds for people who have no access to even basic medical care, let alone life-saving and life-changing procedures. Now in his 60s, Jeff cannot envision retiring because he's having too much fun doing what he loves to do, writing and helping people in need. People can connect with Jeff by emailing him at criderpublicrelations@gmail.com. He also has a profile on LinkedIn and Facebook. That's all I have for this week's show. If you'd like help in identifying a purpose for your life or to get help planning your next steps, I'm offering a complimentary brainstorming session to members of the Forward from 50 Facebook community. For details, connect with me on Facebook or visit www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening. And if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.